Oh, you know this young one. You're in charge. I'm only the secretary. You must be.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Would you please take your seats? Thank you. Tonight, the Hawkesbury and Blue Mountain communities are participating in one of the great privileges of free democratic societies. We are exercising the right to hold ourselves accountable to better appreciate and understand the candidates nominating for the seat of Macquarie and the Australian Senate. With the elections 10 days away, we as voters and as candidates can now listen to each other and respect each other's different point of views without rancour and without condemnation. Good evening, my name is David Bowles. I'm your host for this evening and my roles are as follows. Firstly, to acknowledge the community groups who are co-hosting this meeting, Meet the Candidates evening tonight, to clarify the meeting format, to welcome and introduce the candidates present here this evening, and also to give you the following administrative requirements. One is that if you need to go to the toilets, there are toilets at the rear in the next room and there are toilets in the foyer. Secondly, you need to be aware that the candidates are being live streamed on the Ratepayers Facebook tonight. And also, and interestingly, the co-hosts have organised an exit poll so that as you obviously exit this evening, you are welcome to nominate who you felt won your vote or gave you greater confidence as a consequence of this particular process. Now, firstly, ladies and gentlemen, we should appreciate that most communities rely very heavily upon only a small number of other local residents to routinely hold local politicians to account, to champion our community improvements and otherwise keep us well informed. The community groups serving their communities and co-hosting this forum are to be congratulated, and they are as follows. The North Richmond and District Community Action Association, represented by Colleen Turnbull tonight. The Currajong Community Forum, represented by Fiona Smith. The Hawkesbury Ratepayers and Residents Associations, with Venetia Wilson. The Richmond Mainstream, with Les Bailey. And the Community Action for Windsor Bridge, Peter Reynolds. Some of you may also remember Doug Battersby as a champion of Hawkesbury Council Watch. Sadly, Doug passed away this past weekend, and it's now appropriate to briefly acknowledge his strong community spirit and to extend his family our very best wishes. Moving into the forum will take 3 parts tonight. We'll invite each of the candidates to speak at this microphone to discuss why they're standing and, if elected, how they will propose to benefit the Hawkesbury and Blue Mountain communities. Each candidate will have 2.5 minutes with a 2-minute warning bell. You, the audience, may then question the candidates via the central microphone, and question time, depending upon where the questions are and how long they take, we're proposing, because we want to conclude the evening about 9 o'clock, that the question time would finish about 8:40. And before we finish the evening, the candidates will then briefly address you again to further promote their candidature and or otherwise to clarify any particular points. The candidates will have about 2 minutes to sum up at this occasion. Earlier this evening, the candidates were invited to draw lots to determine the order of appearance. It's my pleasure, therefore, to now officially welcome our candidates and to introduce them to you one at a time. The first will be Susan Templeman of the Australian Labor Party.
And can we point out, I didn't actually draw the first.
No, you actually did not. You were the last here, so you were the last drawn. Susan, thank you.
I've agreed to take it.
She's a gracious lady.
Would you like to take the
I'm going
microphone?
to right now. Absolutely. Thank you. It is terrific to see people out on, instead of home watching, the State of Origin. I'd like to acknowledge that we're on Darug land and pay respects to elders past and present, and extend that respect to any Aboriginal people who are in the room tonight. I'm getting a signal from someone at the back saying my hair's a mess. And that might be because I've been out since 4:30 this morning and doing railway stations and pre-poll. So I apologise if I'm not as well groomed as I might be. I think my name is probably familiar to people. That happens when you've run 3 times. But sometimes the details of your background get lost along the way. I've lived in the electorate for 25 years on the Blue Mountain side of the electorate at Winmalee, and for those who I know, there's already been some who've asked, we have started rebuilding the house. We have a slab. It's the garage slab, so there's still quite a lot more work to do, but we are well and truly on the way to moving back to Winmalee. My background was originally as a journalist. But when I moved to the mountains in 1990, I left journalism, having been a radio broadcaster working for commercial radio, first in Canberra in the Canberra Press Gallery, then in New York and London for a few years. And I got out of journalism and fell into a small business, the way a lot of mums do when they've got kids, a business that grew bit by bit over the years. And that's what I've done for 25 years. I think this election is a very clear choice for people. On the one hand, there's $50 billion of tax cuts for corporates. On the other hand, there's investment that will create jobs in health and education. And I think it's as simple as that when it comes down to the difference between our absent Liberal candidate and what Labor is offering. It's not just about the jobs, actually. And that's what I love about Labor's plan. We're very keen to see small business get a tax cut, and as a small business person, I can't think of a more worthwhile place to be encouraging and persuading people and engaging them so they can put on local people, because small businesses employ local people. Is that my 2-minute warning? So do I get an extra 30 seconds?
Yes. Go.
But it's also about educating our kids, giving them the best start we can. This election's about protecting Medicare so that not just kids but all of us as we age know that there is a health system there to support us. It's also about making housing just that bit more affordable for younger generations, because they're the ones struggling to get into the market. So I think there's a whole range of things, and locally, I'm very happy to talk about my greatest achievements later on in the evening, should that question arise. But what I'd like to see for the future in the Hawkesbury is steps towards a third crossing that provides decent transport solutions for this community, which has been neglected year after year, decade after decade, and at the same time saving transport.
I don't want to rush them through too quickly, but our next speaker is Halley of the Australian Liberal Alliance Party.
Okay, thank you very much for coming tonight. My name's Halley. I'm the candidate for the ALA. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I'm a local. I'm from Lapston in Glenbrook. I'm self-employed. I run a small training company. Our headquarters is in Lapston. We do have branches in Sydney, we do have branches overseas, so we are an international operation as well. I was sort of born and bred in the area, grew up in Winmalee here. I've got a wife, I've got 2 children. I have a real passion for the Blue Mountains and Hawkesbury area, and that's really what got me involved with politics. What got me into the Australian Liberty Alliance, which is a new party, and most of you probably not that familiar with it, is that I'm a former Liberal. So I'm a former Liberal voter, I'm a conservative person, and we felt that the Liberals have sort of lost direction a little bit, moved away from the right side of the fence, so to speak, and we decided to set up a party and form it, basically pushing conservative ideas, conservative thoughts, etc. The Australian Liberty Alliance, our headquarters is in Melbourne, but we do have people standing in the lower house, in Lindsay, Macquarie, for example, and we've got some people in the Senate. I guess we're a broad spectrum policy party. We're not just focusing on one issue in particular. We're looking at right across the board, things like immigration, things like employment, things like education. So look at us as a new Liberal party, so to speak. It's a shame Louise is not here to discuss Liberal politics, but maybe another time. No. There's four things that are, out of all the policies we're going to bat for that have interested me the most. I'll start with the two local ones. One is your bypass here. Now, obviously, it'll be a Labor or Liberal election coming up. They'll be the strongest groups, Labor, Liberal. But what we want to do is get into the Senate and into the lower house just to keep the bypass on the agenda and keep pushing it. Okay. The airport's big, especially for the people in the Blue Mountains. We want to make sure we have a say in that. It looks like it's going ahead because it's bipartisan support, so we just want to make sure that the checks and balances are in place for flight passes, etc. Immigration, we're big on immigration. It'll be controversial on immigration, but we do want to make sure it's very selective on who comes into the country, and we believe in integration and assimilation. There's been a lot of controversy about things we've supposedly said and so forth, but we do have everyone from every walk of life in our party, religions and races and so forth, so we're very open. But we do believe we've got to be selective who comes in. The other one is green energy. A lot of people are surprised that we're involved with green energy, but we've got Ron Piper in the National Party, and he's been helping us set up a hydroelectricity scheme. Okay, thank you very much.
It is a sausage factory.
I'm not a sausage.
I'd now like to call on Terry Morgan for Greens.
Thank you very much, and thanks for inviting me to be here. And I'd like to echo Susan's point about acknowledging the fact that we're on Aboriginal land and paying respect to their elders. I have a background in teaching, about 30 years of it, and that's part of the reason that I'm concerned about the things that have brought me to be a candidate. But another one is that I have 6 grandchildren. And I know you're all saying he's far too young to have 6 grandchildren, but it is true. I told my daughters I was too young, but they didn't listen. And I really, really firmly believe that we ought to be voting in this election, not for us and what we have and our privileges and our incredible wealth, being the wealthiest country in the world on a per capita basis, but for the kind of planet, the kind of environment that we will leave for our children and our grandchildren and future generations. And that's why I joined the Greens. I believe strongly in struggling to preserve and protect our natural and built heritage, everything from the Greater Blue Mountains World Heritage Area to the Windsor Bridge. And of course I support this community in its insistence on a bypass on the third crossing of the river. I believe that development, when it does happen, should benefit people and preserve the environment. Everything we have that's of value in our lives ultimately comes from the natural environment. It's not a matter of, some people seem to say, we can have the economy, we can have a good economy, or we can have the environment. It is not a choice. The economy is a wholly owned subsidiary of the environment. Trash what we have, trash our natural resources, and we have nothing. You can't eat money. I also believe in the cause of a decent and humane policy towards people who come to our country seeking asylum and seeking our protection. And I believe it's unconscionable that we should lock them up in tropical hellholes on the pretense that we're actually using them as a deterrent against other people who might come here. It's an insult to our intelligence and an insult to our consciences. I don't have any more time. Sorry, maybe later.
I might add that we've done this quite deliberately to just introduce the candidates to you. There's no point asking questions if you don't know fundamentally what they're standing for. So that's really what this first part of the evening is about. Our next speaker is Peter Gooley. He's an independent and he's standing for the Senate. So he's slightly apart. And also he advises me this is the first time he's stood up in front of a community forum, so please offer him a warm welcome.
Yeah, hi everybody. I'll bring you down to my height. My name's Peter Gooley. I live locally. I'm up here at Glossodia. I have spoken in front of audiences before, but it's the first time I've run an election. What brought me to running the election was that I've been an advocate for a lot of things for a long time now. I've been involved with the board at the hospital as a volunteer there on the CBOA. I've been involved with men's groups, with community centres, things like that. And what I found was that the more I talked about the things I was involved in and was passionate about, and I'm also an Alzheimer's and dementia coach, that's a real passion of mine. And the more I talked about these things with my mother, who was diagnosed in 2011 with dying with cancer, the more she said to me, you need to get into politics and really work your passion. So that's why I'm here. The things that matter to me, excuse me, of what I'm going to be doing in the Senate, it's about let's continue to have it be a house of review, not a rubber stamp. We really don't want either party. We don't want anybody having full control over both houses of Parliament. That leaves you in a situation where there's going to be rubber stamps flying around all over the place and somebody's going to put an eye out. It's simple as that. Aged care. Just let me throw a figure at you. $60.2 billion. That's a lot of money. What that was the value applied by Access Economics to the unpaid care that workers did in just 1 year in Australia in 2014. That's amazing. And that's a huge saving. And when we hear ministers talk about, well, one of the things we might start looking at cutting is carers' allowances, that we really have to start to wonder, do they know what they're talking about? Do they understand? Have they done their own research? And if they haven't, when stuff like that ends up in the Senate, that's when you need people like me there to put their hand up, go, hang on, let's have a look at that. That's what I'm about. There's far more things I have a lot more feeling about what we should be doing with our youth, including them into forums, online forums, the way they like it. And if it's a good idea brought to the Senate, it shouldn't matter what colour tie you're wearing. I deliberately didn't wear a tie tonight, because it shouldn't matter what colour your tie is. If it's a good idea, it's a good idea. Let's do the review, let's do the assessment to find out all the facts and pull back all the curtains rather than just one or two windows and that's all we get to see. Okay, thank you.
Our next speaker is Catherine Lincoln from the Christian Democrats.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to read mine because last time I got up here on the my first maiden speech, I didn't even get off first base, so I waffled on too long. So save your being bored, I'm going to read it. I love the Hawkesbury and the Blue Mountains area. Being a local resident of 35 years, I'm passionate about preserving this historical and biodiverse environment that my family has enjoyed over the years. My husband and I have run a family business here in Richmond, Hawkesbury City Realty, for the last 12 years, and we currently employ 9 local staff. I'm passionate about protecting Australian culture and lifestyle that I've known throughout my life, and I guess that's what brought me into running for this position. I find that Australia is just moving too quickly. I believe our government needs to have people in government that gives independent voice to the people outside the two main parties. We stand for the good old die-hard Aussies, having a conservative approach to the integration of multiculturalism, family and environmental issues. I will support legislation that reduces our deficit and grows our economy, provides jobs, provides pensioners with a lifestyle of dignity that those needing support or assistance to join or rejoin the workforce. Growth for our hospitals is a must and a priority, and importantly, supporting and growing the next generation through our school system into respectful and responsible, compassionate and educated citizens of Australia. I will support freedom of speech and religion, acceptance of different nationalities and ideologies that do not threaten our heritage, safety or culture. I am adamant for the protection of our superannuation, particularly Medicare, protection of our environment in regards to the proposed Western Sydney Airport and the surrounding infrastructure, to ensure that our historic areas and Blue Mountains are least affected. I will push for a fast-track 4-lane bridge crossing from Richmond to North Richmond and Windsor to Wilberforce. I know what it's like with the bank up of traffic through Richmond, and that is really something that has to be pushed through. Thank you.
Our final speaker for the opening is Ginges from the Animal Justice Party.
I'm Ginges. I've lived in the Blue Mountains for nearly 40 years. I'm a local lawyer. I work as a defence lawyer, which I've done for all that time, and I continue to do that in Katoomba. I chose to stand for Parliament and stand for the Animal Justice Party because most of my work is for those who are defenceless. I defend people who are candidates for legal aid, who are in real trouble, and I know that if people like me didn't help them, nobody would help them, and they'd be in even greater trouble. When I started to see what was happening, I started to listen to the news and see what was happening with live animal export and the other terrible things that have happened to animals, I started to realise that it's not just adults whom I appear for in court and the many children I appear for as well who are also defenceless, but it's animals as well who are totally defenceless. And I realise that in fact that the other parties, and sadly even the Greens, with whom I have much in common, don't seem to be doing enough to move on so that we don't treat animals cruelly and that we start to treat them with the compassion they need and they deserve. And so I decided to stand for the Animal Justice Party, to stand for that principle of compassion, which for us starts with our focus upon animals and the avoidance of the terrible cruelty they suffer, but also then extends out from animals to the wider community. So what we stand for really is the principle of compassion being brought into political and social life where we feel it belongs. So that's why I'm standing. Now, how could I benefit the community if I were to be elected? I do spend my whole life speaking for those who can't speak for themselves, and I'm very experienced at that, and that's what I would bring to the community if you elected me. I'm experienced at that, I enjoy doing it, I like to stand up for those who need their voice to be heard. I know a little bit about the local community. I've actually been on Peter's Bridge Watch at Windsor, and with my wife Heather, who's here with me today, and because we can see this is also something which needs to be addressed, and if people don't stand up for themselves and have those to speak for them, who can speak for them, then they will be ridden over. So my plea to you is to elect somebody who will speak up for those who can't speak for themselves. As I said initially, from our perspective in the Animal Justice Party, that's the animals, but it extends out to compassion for all. Thank you.
Thank you. I should note that the co-hosts were very conscious that for this forum to have its full value, all people standing for the seat of Macquarie and for the Senate from this district should be here. They were invited to be here, and it's disappointing to note that for whatever reason, the Shooters, Fishers and Farmers Party, the Liberal Party of Australia, the Derryn Hinch Justice Party and the Liberal Democrats were unable to be here. and in part that diminishes the full value of this community forum. We now come to that period where we open the floor for your questions. I would ask you to take note, for the sake of a fully productive meeting, that we perhaps observe a number of fundamental rules. The first, or guidelines rather, the first is that this forum is specifically interested in the political views and the aspirations of the candidates. So please refrain from any personal soapbox dissertations, if that's your inclination. Secondly, while a brief introduction to your question may be warranted, please quickly get to the point. Thirdly, while it's difficult to avoid state and local political issues which overlap when we're having a federal election, I would ask you to focus on federal issues, albeit they may still impact our community. In fact, most definitely will impact our community. And the final point I'd like to make to the audience is that you may specify whom you wish to direct your question, but each of the candidates will have one right of reply per question if they feel they have got something to contribute to the particular subject of discussion. And the last point for the audience is when you take the microphone, could you please let us know your name and if you like your suburb, so that there's some connection between the candidate and the speaker. I'd also ask of the candidates that it's easy to be sidetracked sometimes, and I'd ask you to take particular note of the questions being put and try and answer the question that is put before you. And as I've indicated before, you do have a right of reply, but if you choose not to take that, you won't be slighted. It just may be something you're not, it's not something you want to particularly talk to, so you're not obliged to. But if you do want to make a comment, then please indicate to me and we'll put you in the order of speech. That's the process. Would anyone else like to start the questions?
Thanks, Chair. My name is Michael White and I live up at Grizelj. I have circulated an article out of the Sydney Morning Herald this morning to all the candidates, and in particular the second paragraph where it mentions that 31 economists by the Economic Society of Australia has found almost 2/3 agree with the statement that Australia will receive a bigger economic growth dividend in the long run by spending money on education than offering an equivalent amount of money on tax cuts to business. Do you agree or do you have a different point of view? Susan, please.
I hadn't seen this article from this morning, so thank you for putting it in my hand, Michael. I would absolutely agree with those economists, not being an economist myself, but looking at the information that Labor released when we talked about our $37 billion investment in education for funding the last 2 years of the Gonski transition program, the 5th and 6th years. And the OECD's expectation was around about a 2.8% growth in the medium term. And that might not sound like a lot, but if we contrast that with the growth that is expected to come from the corporate tax cuts that the Liberals are suggesting, that Treasury, Australian Treasury's own figures suggest a 0.1% growth from a $50 billion tax cut. So a 0.1% growth from a $50 billion tax cut versus a 2.8% medium-term growth from an investment, $37 billion investment in education. And if you think about it, it's logical. The minute you put money into education, you're employing people, you're employing teachers, you're employing, in this electorate, from early Gonski money, we've seen speech therapists employed, we've seen all sorts of education professionals and health professionals who can work with kids to really maximise their educational opportunities. So it immediately flows to jobs, and that then flows through the rest of the economy. The other key thing around, when I quickly looked at what this was talking about, is we also want to see a commitment into TAFE education and a greater commitment into TAFE education and no cuts to university funding. So the Liberals have on the books a 20% cut to university funding. Again, that's a contraction of the job market in universities. So it seems obvious to all these economists, it certainly seems obvious to the Labor Party, that one of the best investments we can make is to put money into education. The bonus that we are developing and creating a group of students from a really early stage so they can be the innovators for the future and be ready for the jobs of the future. So thank you. It's a great article and I really commend people read it.
I'd also like to concur with the statement that investment in education is a far more valuable investment than a corporate tax cut. There is no evidence anywhere that when you give tax breaks to big business, it has that miraculous trickle-down effect and stimulates economic growth and employment. It's just not there. Apart from that, looking at it from the other point of view, from my own years as a teacher, education is not a cost, it is an investment. It's an investment in our biggest and most important resource, our children and young people. I've gravitated throughout my teaching career mostly to disadvantaged schools, remote Aboriginal community schools, schools in low socioeconomic areas on the fringes of our cities, and my first job was even in a prison, which was a fascinating experience, I can tell you. But we even had the former Federal Education Minister, Christopher Pyne, suggesting that there's no evidence that reducing class sizes improves children's performance. I beg your pardon? I've been a teacher for 30 years and we battled and battled to get those class sizes down to the point where we can give kids the individual attention that we know they need. The first stages of Gonski money that have already been spent here in Windsor, kids in Windsor and the Hawkesbury, kids are already benefiting. Schools here have been able to employ teacher aides to give kids special attention, to run specific programs for disadvantaged kids. I hate this expression, it's an Americanism, but it's a no-brainer. Thank you.
Hi again. What's this got to do with the Senate? For me, what this article here has brought up is the conversations going on around the negative gearing and the changes that Labor are suggesting and the Liberals are saying, no, this is all a lie. And then we have the whole thing running around where everything's being a lie. And we have information coming out that, maybe they knew about these figures beforehand as far as the Liberal Party is concerned, and they didn't tell anybody about it, but they opened this little bit of window. My point about this is that if this is right, then the job of the Senate is not to go in there with one little thing they want to have, their own little banner they want to wave, and that's not what I'm about. What it's about is, as a senator, you need to go in there and review these things, these ideas, have a look at them. Make sure you've opened all the curtains to all the windows so you get all the light in so everybody gets to know exactly what's going on. So there's nothing hidden under the table, there's nothing that we don't get to know, so we can have full confidence in what the people who are making those decisions and the bills that are being passed actually are doing it for the good of our grandchildren's grandchildren. And that's what it should all be about. That's where we should all be thinking. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I mentioned beforehand that I'm a lawyer, and I am, but I'm also a person with a lifelong interest in education and education for life. When my wife and I had young children and we weren't satisfied with the kinds of schools that were available for us, this is back in the early 1980s, we and a few other parents founded the Blue Mountain Steiner School, which is at Hazelbrook and continues to this day. We did that because education mattered to us, and we wanted a form of education which we felt would enable our children to continue to desire to learn all their lives. And because I feel that way too, when I was in my 50s, so 10 or so years ago, I decided that I wanted to go back to uni and to study what I had really wanted to study, aside from law, and that's philosophy. And so I was very fortunate because our local Western Sydney University took me on as a student and granted me a doctorate a few years ago in philosophy, and now I teach there as well 1 day a week. So I put together being a lawyer and being a part-time teacher at Western Sydney University. And the benefit of that for me is to see what it means to all the young people coming through to have a complete education. My feeling is that all of us in life, of course, we have to have jobs in which we work and we earn our incomes, but we also need to feel that all through life, our life allows us to continue to be educated. And so for me, the answer is pretty clear. I mean, it's, as Terry said, it's a no-brainer. What really matters is that we put as much as possible of our resources into education. And I have no hesitation in supporting the use of the money for education rather than for tax cuts. Thank you.
Conservative view now. I've only just read this brief, it was only handed to me as I walked through the door. It seems to be mixed. There are people who are for it strongly, there are people who are sort of saying, yeah, that sort of makes sense, and there's a person, Rodney Maddock, who disagrees at the end. I think the answer is somewhere in the middle. You've got to invest money into education, there's no two ways about that, but you've also got to get behind companies, because if you don't get behind companies, you won't have jobs. So it is I suppose, a 50-50 bet. You have to have an educated population. You've got to invest money into your children. I've got 2 children, and they're both doing well. But they both had a good education. But they also had to get jobs when they leave. So I would say that, yeah, you've got to invest definitely into schools, definitely into education, but you also have to look after companies as well, because we've got to give incentive to create jobs. I've worked a lot in Singapore and places like that. That's got a great tax system. It's very, very low on big business, and it does stimulate the economy a lot, you know. And I think in a country like Australia, where we've got enormous natural resources, if we can just get behind companies as well to utilise what we've got smart people, you know, we've got a lot of natural resources, as I said. I think we can create a lot of jobs. So I would say it's a 50-50 bet. Education, but you also got to help companies because you still need a job when you leave school. Thank you.
Right, well, being an employer of local people, I have noticed over the 11 or 12 years that we've been here that just about every time I have to advertise for a receptionist, and a receptionist straight out of school, I might have 50 kids, you know, 16, 17, 18, apply for those jobs. I would say probably 2 or 3 of them are ready for the workforce. This is where my passion is insofar as education. I think we've got to stop looking at education as just putting money into education and thinking that it's going to actually produce a lot more, but more that we look what they are being educated at. Too many kids, I believe, these days go to university that don't need to go to university. There are kids that need to be taught that hate school, like I did. They need to be taught in apprenticeships. They need to be assisted into any type of job. You just don't come out of school and sit in a reception desk and learn. I'm not giving that person my business. They're the front end of my image to the business. And I want them to carry themselves like the rest of us do professionally. So I do believe that we need to put money into education. I don't believe in the Safe School program. 500 million, I think, or whatever it is. It's just an utter disgrace. And you can see I'm very passionate about it. The desexualisation of our society begins with 4-year-old children, 5-year-olds, and get onto Google and have a look at it. That is a waste of money. They don't need to know how they feel about being a boy or a girl at 10, 9, 8, 6, whatever. So I think the money that's spent in education can be spent better to produce better. In regards to the company corporate tax, I know that you'd all think, well, I would really love that. And yes, I would if it actually made a difference in my business. But speaking to my accountant, he said, Catherine, I said, what do you think about, you know, this company tax that we're going to get from the Liberals? And he said, it's going to save you about $150 a week, Catherine. I can't employ somebody for $150. I can't even employ them, most, you know, professional people now for a day for that. So, you know, I think there has to be really to go into this. They're spouting off big figures and it sounds all fabulous, but I actually really think we have to go into those policies and find where that money is being spent and is it being spent wisely, and where that money is being given and is it being given wisely. Not like the $800 we got a few years ago from Labor. For everybody just have a $800 bonus. We're wearing that now. So I think that there needs to be more of a microscope over these issues being put forward to see that they're being spent and given wisely.
Do we have another question?
My name is Brian Smith. I live locally here in North Richmond. I have been very disturbed at the polarisation that has occurred in politics over this election. I'm particularly disturbed when we find that the leaders of the party are accusing each other of lying. One aspect of this has been in terms of Medicare, where there's been a clear indication from Malcolm Turnbull that he believes that Bill Shorten has been lying. I find this disturbing. Maybe it's dishonest to say that the Liberals tend to not privatise Medicare, but it would be apparent that they are indeed emasculating Medicare. So my question basically is this question of lying. I can't believe that candidates really believe their opposition is lying. And I wondered if all candidates could ponder on this, and perhaps Susan could respond to the reasons. What was it behind Bill Shorten? What did Bill Shorten know that made him claim that Medicare was under threat of privatisation?
Well, it's not just the leaders who've been accused of telling a lie. At a forum on Monday night, I was accused of telling a lie as well. And it was around Medicare. Now, I've got a 24-year-old daughter. When she's talking to me about her boyfriends, I say to her, listen, darling, it's not what they say, it's not what they tell you, it's what they do that gives you an indicator of what their intent is. So let's look at the intent based on the behaviour. From Friday week, the Medicare payments, the rebates that GPs and doctors get when they bulk bill you have been frozen. That's happening. That's not maybe one day in the future. That's from Friday week, 9 days away. That's one thing that undermines Medicare as a universal healthcare system. We were to have had pathology tests and scans frozen in the same way, the rebates to the providers frozen, from Friday week. That's been delayed by several months. I guess you'd have to ask why was that delayed, but it certainly means it takes it out of a 2nd of July education mix and gives some people a bit of comfort, but it's a 3-month delay at best. Let's look at other things that have happened. Only 2 days ago, Malcolm Turnbull said, well, we are no longer going to sell off the servicing of records and billing. So your Medicare records, my Medicare records, there has been a process underway, that would be the Medicare Privatisation Task Force work, to look at how can that be taken off the government's books. That's privatisation. You take it off the government's books, it's no longer government owned, therefore it's privatised. We have forced a backflip on that. That's a pretty amazing thing to do in an election campaign. Let's also look at the decision that the government made to refer Medicare to the Productivity Commission. That's an action they've taken. Now, you don't set up Medicare privatisation task forces. You don't refer things to the Productivity Commission unless your intent is to proceed down that path. And so I think when we look at it, you can play with words, and it's an election, so people will throw words around, but let's look at the intent. And it's very clear to me that they will look at whatever they can. They already are doing what they can. There's one other thing that has been a little bit lost in this election, and that's Australian Hearing. An organisation that looks after children up to the age of 18 with serious hearing conditions and older Australians, where you can go and bulk bill, the equivalent of bulk billing, you can receive the things that you need so you can hear. Now, as someone who wears hearing aids, it changes your life to be able to hear. People tell me you would always look very intently at someone as I was talking to them. It wasn't until I got hearing aids that I realised that's because I was lip reading them. So you know, that is the amount of concentration it takes to listen to somebody. You don't realise until suddenly you can hear easily. Now, that sort of gift that we give people, that they deserve, we do it as part of our Medicare system. That system, we are waiting for a decision about what will happen to Australian hearing. The plan is to privatise it. There are a number of organisations who are horrified at that plan and have put forward an alternative proposition so that it will be off the government books, but possibly not in a for-profit environment. We're still waiting for the government to make the decision, and guess what? They didn't make that before they called an election either. So I feel very comfortable in standing here and saying, not only does this government want to privatise Medicare, it wants to destroy Medicare in any way that it can.
Just a very brief comment. Not only are the Greens adamantly opposed to the privatisation or any reduction of Medicare, we also believe that primary dental care should be part of the suite of services available under Medicare, and that's because dental care is, decent dental care is A, the difference between poor countries and rich countries in the world, one of the big differences, and B, it's the difference between poor people and wealthy people here in Australia. And people who can't afford decent dental care are often subject to other health issues that follow on from poor dental health. So we certainly agree with the Labor Party on that one, but we would take things a step further.
Democratic Party also supports the Medicare and the non-privatisation of that as well. I just feel that people need, I was in hospital myself at the end of last year, and our hospitals are in an atrocious mess. They need more money, and I think people that haven't got insurance, they need to be looked after, like our pensioners. I think our pensioners should be on the top of the list to be looked after for all those needs that they need, for hearing, for seeing, for any of their dementia problems or any of their medication that they need. They should be up there at the top of the list to be looked after. They have put Australia where Australia is today, and we need to take that responsibility to turn around and look after them. So yes, we are very much opposed to the privatisation, you know what I mean, of Medicare, and we will be backing that as well.
I won't say more about Medicare because we take a similar view, but I'll actually address, it's Brian, isn't it? Sorry?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah. I'll address the more general issue that Brian was talking about, which is the issue of people telling lies, that being a concern in politics, which I think leads on to the common discussion about who can you trust, and I guess the reason that we now have, I think, about 25% of the Australian populace not voting for the two major parties is because there's been some degree of loss of trust. And I mean, one can see that certainly in recent times in some of the promises that have been made by people on both sides of politics. I mean, we know about the no carbon tax from Julia Gillard. There was a breach of a promise there. Many breaches of promises from Tony Abbott, who promised so many things: no cuts to Medicare, no cuts to education, no cuts to TAFE and so on, and they were all cut. So we all have good reason not to trust the major parties, and that's, I think, why people are drawn now to the Greens and also to the independents and minor parties like the Honourable Justice Party. And I suppose what I would say to you is that a reason you might think you could trust someone from our party is that one thing about animals is they don't tell lies.
Yeah, okay. So the thing that, from a Senate perspective, if we're going to be looking at things like privatisation, we really need to understand some things about that and the possible ramifications. I'm a testicular cancer survivor, so I'm involved with people all over the world in supporting other people, other men as they travel down that journey. I'm also involved with dementia support right across the planet as well. What we find, what we see, is the damage that happens to families as they lose all of their income, and then they get these massive, huge bills that come in from their hospitals and their doctors. Now, if privatisation is that, if that's going to be the result of privatisation in Australia, and if that's where we're headed, and I'd want to see the facts and figures. I don't want to hear, oh yes it is, we need to, as a Senate, like I keep saying, we need to review these things. That's what I'm there to do. And, you know, you'll find me right in the young group, right down the other end, down the bottom of that last column actually, probably the third last down. But those are the sort of people like myself, and there are other independents who will also get in there and do that sort of stuff. We need to remind ourselves, remind the House of Reps, it's a House of Review, don't give us a rubber stamp, let's get on and check it.
I think the gentleman was talking about ethics and moral. That was the fundamental point he was getting at. I guess politics has become like a brand. Before we used to have ideology, but now we're brands, so to speak. So everyone's trying to sell their brand. So they'll say what they think you want to hear so that you buy it, so you get elected in. Best thing to do is to check everyone's policies out, make sure that what are their policies, what are they about, and are they sticking to them. You know, vote for Australian Liberty Alliance because you like our core policies. If you don't like them, don't vote for us. If we are caught out bending the truth, or however you want to say it, bring it to everyone's attention. But we need to get back to ideology. What is the party's ideology? What do they stand for? You know, we're Conservatives. You don't have to look at our preferential voting, you know. We have given our preferential votes to Conservatives, people of similar beliefs. We haven't given it to the left for obvious reasons, you know. So we've stuck to that. Yet some people in Conservative politics have given their preferential votes to the left. That's something we didn't get. So we won't bend on that. If we do, then we have to be held accountable. And that's really what it gets down to. It's up to the voters to look at each party. What is their ideology? What do they stand for? We have to get back to that and not just say things that make us feel good and we'll get votes. Okay, thank you.
My name's Jeanette Hayden. I live in North Richmond and I've lived here since 1983. My question could be aimed at all of you. I'm wondering what your stance is on foreign ownership of our properties, our land, our farms, our businesses and our homes, which are causing problems for our production of food our economy and our lifestyle, and for our younger generation trying to buy homes?
Our policy is it's got to be reciprocal. If you can buy and invest in this country under strict rules and regulations, we have to be able to invest and buy in your country. We realise it's a globalised world, and you know, business runs internationally, and we want investment into Australia. We don't want to cut off investment. Without investment, we start to decrease jobs. But it has to be very strictly controlled. We can't just be selling off real estate. We can't just be selling off houses. We've got to monitor what goes on. We also need reciprocal rights that we can buy and invest in other people's countries as well. So that's the policy that we're coming from. At the moment, for example, China's buying up a lot of farming, a lot of mines and so forth, but we cannot buy there because they believe that it's a land bank. And in any economy, you always have a land bank. It's just protected. It's one of the fundamental things you look after within an economy. So I think it has to be very, very strict about foreign investment coming in, but it also has to be reciprocal. So if we're not getting the same deal, we don't give it to them. Okay, thank you.
I'm astonished to find that to some extent I agree with Carl. I wasn't expecting that to happen at all.
I own a dog too. We're not all that evil on the right.
But I guess I'm old enough to have recorded in Australia when we had secondary industry here, which we've lost by and large. That distresses me. I am distressed at the thought of foreign ownership of so much of Australia's land, and especially of foreign countries coming in and taking over the land for agriculture. I think it's a mistake in a way, and I think I'm trying to understand myself really, because I'm surprised at the extent to which I find it distressing, and I think it's because it's to do with a loss of connectedness with the whole of our country and the whole of the community. And I think the effect of it is that we then become very much separated one from another and from the land that we've been born into and which we love. And I suppose from the perspective of the Animal Justice Party, clearly our love of our animals, I mean the native animals and also the other ones, has to do with how they relate to us and to the whole of our land. And so I guess that's part of the reason that I feel, much as Carl does, I think that it's not right to be just selling off things to foreign countries. I don't feel quite the same way, I suppose, about being kind of tit for tat. If they can do it to us, we do it to them. I think rather more strongly that there needs to be some protection of what we have held dear for so many generations.
In a very international world today, and I think we're moving too fast into an international world in regards to selling off our country. Just recently, just before the election, there was changes made to the taxation system to accommodate Sharia law investment. Now that is so that we can actually have the eastern countries invest into our country and come in and buy our infrastructure. That really distresses me. In regards to anything going to foreign hands, I think the Foreign Investment Board needs to be reviewed, because I have had situations myself that I have reported in regards to people buying from overseas that I don't believe should have been passed by the Foreign Investment Board. And those people are people that we don't want here in Australia. So I would like to see something, like investigation into the Foreign Investment Board and much more strict rules put on what we actually sell off.
I distinctly remember a very embarrassed and uncomfortable looking Malcolm Turnbull when he was asked the question by the media about why did he realise that the Northern Territory Country Liberal Party government had just sold the port of Darwin to a Chinese company with strong links to the People's Liberation Army? And he didn't quite know where to put himself, because on the one hand he's very much in favour of foreign investment and a looser, more deregulated international trade and investment, but clearly that was something that would have struck a fairly uncomfortable note with a lot of Australians. It's not a very simple matter. It's not as simple, I don't think, as Carl's tit for tat, because if we were simply to follow that sort of guideline, the very, very big, much more powerful and wealthy countries would simply out-invest us, out-purchase us, so it doesn't quite work that way. But clearly our food security, for example, is the Chinese are very concerned about their food security, and one of the things they're doing in order to ensure their food security is buying Australian farmland. And I think if we're not smart enough to realise that food security is in our interests as well, I think we need to smarten up. I don't think that there's it's like, as H.L. Mencken says, for every complex question there's a simple answer, and it's wrong. This is a complex field, but it needs to be guided and governed by Australia's national interest. Thank you.
Susan, I have a feeling you want to say something.
Terry's already alluded to the Port of Darwin sale. As someone who works in the Northern Territory every month or so, that was an extraordinary decision to be made without reference to the federal government. And the fact that Malcolm Turnbull didn't seem to realise the implications of it was stunning in a bad way. In terms of the Foreign Investment Review Board, we do need to have a very well equipped and resourced Foreign Investment Review Board. It's not surprising that they can't necessarily investigate everything, because like every other sector, public sector department and organisation, they've been cut and cut and cut. And that goes from rural organisations like the Rural Industries Development Corporation, which has just lost so many people who've been working with rural communities to really build and expand what they do. So those sorts of things need to be attended to, because we are not going to be able to have the controls we would like to have without a strong Foreign Investment Review Board. We have always relied on foreign investment. Originally, it was British investment that established the colonies here, including here in Windsor and North Richmond. Well, it came to Windsor long before it came to North Richmond. We've had American investment, we've had a lot of European investment. In the 80s, I don't know if everyone remembers, and early 90s, Japanese investment. And at any time when a new area of investment comes in, it does get on people's radar, and that's why we have to have confidence, which I don't think we have at the moment, that the Foreign Investment Review Board is equipped to do its job. The other thing to think about is free trade agreements. One of the things that Labor was extremely concerned about in the China Free Trade Agreement was the ability for Chinese workers to work in Australia with less qualifications than Australian equivalents. So electricians with lower qualifications. Now, it's great to have investment, it's great to have things being built in the appropriate places, but you want them built to the appropriate standards. And so that's another aspect of it that for me comes into that whole investment picture. The other side, the food security side, we do, when we were in government, I'm not sure if people here, Hawkesbury Harvest was certainly involved in quite a lot of consultations around food security. It was a really interesting process to identify who owned what, where was food being grown, where were the productive areas, to really map it. Now, once we lost office, that work, I think, just disappeared into the ether, which is a real shame. And you would have thought that a coalition where the National Party plays a role might have continued that sort of work. So I think that's really important work for us to do. And that's where the implications for this area come in, because that sort of work should start to tell us what areas do we need to really think about land use. Is a patch of land more appropriately used for agriculture, or should we just pop a sea full of roofs in it? And I think for this side of the river and along the floodplain area, they're the sorts of questions that the mapping and food security work really could be done. I think there's huge potential there, and I think it will have real implications for this part of the world. And it would obviously need to be done with community engagement from our producers, plus interested residents who are concerned perhaps about what we're seeing in terms of the decline of the agricultural feel, especially this side of the river. So lots of really important issues, and I don't think anyone has a simple answer to them.
I don't disagree with anything that was said, so there's no point in adding to it.
Excuse me, I didn't think I'd be saying this tonight, but we'll now take a question from Facebook.
Yes. Malcolm Turnbull and Tony and Bill Shorten can do it, we can do it too. Very good. We've had quite a few people watching online. I've been watching how many watches there have been. Sorry, my laptop's going a bit early there. Quite a few people have been complaining about the quality of the video they're getting, that it's buffering, it's taking a long time to come through. And I've had 4 or 5 people say, are they still going to be alive when the NBN comes west of the river? Can the candidates please let us know what their thoughts are on getting better technology west of the river?
Do you want to start with that? Okay.
After fighting with NBN for 2 years, you don't want it. Today, I can still pick up my phone and still have somebody say, I can't hear what you're saying. We've gone back to the dark ages as far as I'm concerned. That needs an overhaul. I don't know whether it wasn't put in properly or whether it was rushed in. We didn't even exist on the map when NBN was going to be connected. The whole thing is so poorly organised that it is an utter disgrace, and I don't believe that the NBN should go any further until it is actually done and prepared for properly. It's just unbelievable that, you know, businesses should be put in a situation. We have businesses in Richmond that actually were given mobile phones because they could not even use their phones. Our internet's out, our emails go missing. We are going backwards. You do not want it over the river. Keep on to your lives.
So before I became an Alzheimer's and dementia coach, I actually started in IT in 1977, and I was made redundant out of that in 2008. Because apparently I was too old by then to get back into it. But I can tell you that, so computing-wise and internet and things like that, I've got a pretty good idea of, and I've heard a lot of people say to me, or have heard cases of people saying to me how much trouble they've had getting the NBN put in, and they had to keep coming back, and da-da-da. And then I was talking to other people who have said, it could not have been more smooth and could not have been more brilliant. It's the best thing that has ever happened. Mind you, they're all on that side of the river. You know, I don't agree that we should not have the NBN come through. Whatever way we can get the NBN and increase our speeds, the better for us all. It means that we can then have those medical homes that we're talking about, that both sides of government are talking about, where we have more facilities that are actually in the home that can actually help monitor people, especially somebody who's living alone, help monitor them and have services come to them far more quickly and in an appropriate timing. So do we want the NBN? Absolutely we want the NBN, and whatever we can do to get it put through, do it.
I'm making an announcement tomorrow with Jason Clare, the Telecommunications Minister, and I'm going to be able to let you in on the details early. First thing I want to say is that Malcolm Turnbull, as Telecommunications Minister, had one job to do. And Catherine has just described the effect of the job he had to do, a frustrating process for people who should have been able to access the 21st fibre technology to their home or to their business. It is a scandal that the current rollout, should the Liberals retain office, will involve fibre going down your street, past your house, to a box. So this is for anywhere that doesn't currently have it and isn't on either the Wi-Fi or the satellite plan. It'll go to a box. It's called a node, but it's a great big box. It's about this big, this high. You can sort of lean on it quite comfortably, and it's bigger than a picket fence. So it will go to the box, and there'll be fibre, beautiful, high-speed, 21st century technology to that box. Unfortunately, that box needs cooling and heating and all those sorts of things. It needs an engine to keep it going. From that box to your home or your business, you get copper. Not just old copper, because we had to buy new copper for it, because the old copper was too degraded. Now, the copper was degraded for a reason. It's old technology. And the plan, Malcolm Turnbull's plan, was to deliver it faster, deliver it cheaper. Well, in fact, it has taken twice as long to achieve the rollout, and it's costing twice as much. And we know we've jumped from 30th in our speed to 60th, so it's twice as slow by world standards. So Labor is committed to bringing fibre back to the premises, whether that's your home or your office. On this side of the river, the areas where we will be looking to do that, because these are areas where contracts have not been let, and we made a commitment that we wouldn't break contracts because of the huge cost that that would involve. So places like Bowen Mountain, Grosse Vale, Kermont, Currajong Heights, North Richmond and the slopes will all get, under Labor, fibre to the premises. As will, yes, I know, this is one of my favourite announcements. And Jason Clare might be cranky that I preempted him, but there's no paper coming out till tomorrow after the announcement, right, Connor? As will McGrath's Hill, Pitt Town and Vineyard, and Freeman's Reach, Glossodia and Wilberforce. Now that's the list I have at this stage, and I'll be very happy if there are other parts of the Hawkesbury who want to see themselves on that list. And I can see Yarramundi's got a hand up there. We really do need to look at what is the most cost-effective way, but what gives you best bang for your buck. This is a technology which, to quote Tony Windsor, we need to do it once and do it right, and that's what Labor will do.
Again, just a short comment. It's I agree entirely with what Susan said, but it's the second-rate NBN that we've received from the coalition government. It basically leaves out yet again not just people on the wrong side of the Hawkesbury River, but disadvantaged or remote or distant communities all over Australia, and it seems to leave them out or include them on a completely ad hoc basis. And it seems that people who have missed out for years and years aren't going to receive this benefit. And it's a benefit that you could look at it as a benefit, but certainly in the modern world, in the world of the 21st century, you could also regard it as an essential service, an extremely essential service. I'll just give you one brief example of how a proper NBN, how the rollout of 21st century NBN could help a community like this. And that is, and the same as the Upper Mountains where I live, a lot of us are forced to commute, and the commute is very wearing and very exhausting and keeps us away from our families and so on. With absolute state-of-the-art technology, a lot more of us might possibly be able to work from home at least some of the time and cut down that commute. And that would be to the benefit of our communities and to the benefit of our families. I think it's something we deserve, and I think we've been seriously let down on this one by the federal government.
I agree with Susan and with Terry, so I shan't elaborate that point in itself, but again draw to the wider picture. I mean, when you think about it, how is it that someone who is intelligent like Malcolm Turnbull could have sought to push the fibre to the node system, which we're now getting and which is so inadequate? Well, really what it's about is that he believed, and the coalition believed, that that was something you could sell to people because it was cheaper, supposedly cheaper and supposedly quicker. As it happens, it hasn't been. But what that demonstrates, frankly, on their side of politics is a total lack of principle. All they're about is trying to figure out what it is that they think other people are going to want and be seduced into taking. And that's why they offer things like this fibre to the node, which really is so unsatisfactory. Their view of the world is that they will do what they think will get them into power because it will somehow appeal to people. There's no principle behind it. And as I've said to you, we have a principle behind everything we speak for. It's compassion. Some other parties also have principles they have behind what they do. But the Liberals don't have any principles. And that's why it is that we have what we have.
Next question, please, Lady Dan.
Hi, I'm Tracy Willow from Lawson in the Blue Mountains, and I'm with the Animal Justice Party, so I'll own that. I'm also the owner of 3 rescue dogs, one that was really seriously abused, but I'm not going to talk about puppy mills. My issue is the live export industry. Recently, beaming into our television sets was what was happening in Vietnam. Tonight, travelling here from Parramatta, hearing that a vet who had worked for 11 years or more but lost her position, and the explanation was, I'll get to it quickly, was pressure from the live export industry. Simon Crean said that's outdated evidence that she produced in terms of an 11-year report. The examples were horrendous. You can listen to that tonight on the news. The point that I'd like to know is, what will you do in terms of a party or your stance to ensure that animals don't experience horrendous treatments? There are so many industries, but I'm concentrating on live export. I saw recently one way of dealing with it is covering the ships with blue covers. So out of sight, out of mind. That's not the answer. So what will you do? Because people like me will become knocking on your door when we get another example boom through television into our living rooms.
Well, actually, it's not really mine in the sense that I think Tracy has already said it all. I mean, very clearly, it's something which matters deeply and profoundly to us. But I suppose, can I say that certainly if we're elected, if I'm elected, that will be a prime policy for us to push the parties to stop that live export. It is just horrific. I mean, here, we know that there are ways of controlling the way in which things are done for animals. Overseas, we don't know what happens, how we can see these things happen is terrible, so we certainly would press to stop it completely. And we press the majors to take that policy. I think the Greens are with us, and we press Labor especially to go back to where it was 5 years ago and also be on the same side as us.
Hal has spoken for us in that sense. The Greens would end the live export trade.
I think anyone who saw the Vietnamese footage would be horrified. I can't imagine anyone who wouldn't be completely horrified by what was happening. And you saw what Labor did in government last time that sort of footage came out, which was to stop the trade immediately and work with the industry to try and put some measures in place. Our policy does support live exports. That is the Labor policy. And as someone who does a lot of work in the Northern Territory, I can understand the economic rationale behind that, because an awful lot of lives depend in the Northern Territory on that work. However, we do not support any live trade where animals are cruelly treated. Now, and you saw that in action when Julia Gillard just stopped the trade. What has happened now, Barnaby Joyce inherited the best animal management system in the world. It's nobody else has the sort of tagging of animals and tracing them all the way right through to the last 30 seconds of their life. No other country has bothered to do that except Australia. And that system was working. What we've committed to do, though, given that it is clearly being neglected, we don't know what has happened from the government's perspective. There hasn't been transparency, which is something that we've always advocated, that this system needs to be transparent. And that is really undermining all our trust and confidence in it, not just mine, but the public's. So we've already committed to reviewing that 5-year-old SCAS system, as it's called. We need to see that the system still has integrity, and if not, we need to address those issues with the industry. But that also includes looking at its sanctions, just to determine whether it is doing what it's meant to do, which is to protect animal welfare. We're also committed to establishing an independent Office of Animal Welfare and appointing an Inspector General of Animal Welfare. Both those things I know your party is very keen to see, and Labor sees those equally as important. We will also, in the interest of transparency, this idea that if you cover it up, it isn't happening. Well, we all know what a nonsense that is, no matter what area of the community you're talking about. And so we're committed to providing quarterly ministerial reports to Parliament on the state of the live export sector so that people do know. And that includes any allegations or investigations relating to animal cruelty. Now, they're the sorts of things that Barnaby Joyce has just refused to commit to. So there's a very clear difference between what the current policy is and the sorts of changes that Labor will make.
Okay, I think everyone's clear. Any more questions from that question?
Can I speak at the microphone? It's a bit quiet. Okay. One of the topics that's kind of been missed tonight has been economics. It's under this current government, the debt has trebled, yet they're claiming that they're economically fantastic. But they've drastically cut spending on all the services in order to try and balance the budget. The economists are all saying that we have a revenue problem, but there's been no suggestion of increasing taxes one way or the other, and the mining tax, which did seem to be somewhat more palatable than income tax, has now been taken off the table. So what do you intend to do to improve the budget and make sure that we still get our services, yet you have enough revenue to keep the AAA rating?
The Greens stand for a fair and progressive taxation system. As I said to you before, and I was quoting a report by Credit Suisse a few weeks back that pointed out that Australia is per capita the wealthiest country in the world. Now, that means there's plenty of money for the services that we need for the best education system in the world, health system in the world, welfare and housing systems. It's just the fact is that we're not collecting the revenue from the people who ought to pay it, and that wealth is distributed very unevenly. Another very conservative organisation, the International Monetary Fund, pointed out recently that inequality is the biggest inhibitor of economic growth and prosperity. So you have a government which thinks it needs to cut taxes in order to, and cut taxes at the top end in order to improve our national bottom line. And in fact, where they need to raise revenue, they don't. They cut taxes. And where they shouldn't be raising revenue, where they should be assisting people, they cut services. So it's a two-edged sword. You can call it a revenue problem, or you can call it a spending problem. Either way, it's a matter of balance. And we believe that the orientation is completely incorrect and needs to be corrected. Thank you.
The Shadow Treasurer, Chris Bowen, has been really brutal in making sure that every commitment we've made there's a way of paying for it, and that's outlined. I'm going to urge you to look at our website, which is 100positivepolicies.org.au, because each time there's a policy there, it says where the funds are coming from. There's the taxing of multinationals to make sure they are actually paying their fair share. Before the government came up with a policy, we were pushing for that. There's also rather than handing out tax cuts to companies, we're restricting those to small businesses which have a turnover of up to $2 million a year, because they're the small businesses where we see that a 27.5% tax rate will be beneficial. We're also looking at the structural changes that you make in the system, and that's where the changes to negative gearing policy come in, which of course any existing properties will be grandfathered, so any property owned before the 1st of July 2017 will be able to be negatively geared and achieve the same discount on capital gains tax when that property is sold, a 50% discount. Any properties bought after that date won't benefit from those tax concessions. And what's interesting about the current negative gearing situation is, as a society, as a community, we spend as much subsidising people who are negative gearing through tax concessions, the same amount that we spend on the entire higher education budget. So there's over 30 years that has really gone too far, and that's why we're saying from the 1st of July next year, only new properties, new builds will be entitled to receive those tax incentives, because what that will do is increase housing supply. So that's a structural change that won't pay dividends in the first year or two on the bottom line, but over time will. They're the sorts of savings that Labor is looking at. The other thing that's really interesting, this idea of being, when you talk about the economy and who's good at running the economy, when you look at how robust the economy has been, in the 2.5 years since the 2013 election, company profits have actually fallen 11% to their lowest level since 2010. So that was while we were still coming out of GFC stuff. And this has occurred while the rest of the world's economies are doing pretty well. So the irony is, in the 6 years of Labor's government to 2013, company profits rose 28%.
Money that they get, that I hear, atrocious amounts of money is wasted. It's not just in that sector, it's in every sector. It's in the schools, in the Safe School program. I think that this is where an independent party has the balancing power on what is actually being spent and what is actually being cut out. So I just wanted to put that in. I think we need to go back and look at the history of where we've come from.
I don't have much to add to what Susan and Terry were saying. From our point of view, it's a matter of fairness, really. It's a matter of looking at the whole economy and seeing how things are fairly parted out for different people, and I think that the Labor Party clearly is thinking through how that can be done with superannuation and so on. So we would apply, I guess, that principle of fairness to the whole community and seek to do what is being done there, or is being put forward by Labor, to be fair. So far as the Labor's last time in government is concerned, there was, of course, the GFC that they had to deal with, and they got it through us very well. I think that needs to be borne in mind.
Can I just have a quick line of reply on that one? Is that okay?
Well, really, we did say one response to the question.
That's okay, I'll save it for the wrap-up.
And in fact, I wanted to make that point. When you start a meeting like this, you have no idea where it's going to go. And obviously, I think we've been thoroughly informed on a range of issues, but I think you'd agree with me that we've started to touch the surface of a whole range of other topics. What I would like to do then is take this last question, and that will be the last question from the floor, and then I hope you'll give our speakers just a little latitude, and I would ask them, when they wrap up, that they maybe address any point they want to reinforce, but also they may want to bring to the agenda tonight other things that they believe should be spoken to, so that you at least walk away from here with that broader information than what we've got at this point in time. Is everybody happy with that arrangement? Now, there won't be a lot of liberty. The 2 minutes will not stretch to 10, but it will be a little bit more time to pick up on topics that we haven't had a chance to address as we ought to know. Would you like to ask the question?
Thanks, David.
Macquarie has the 13th highest number of same-sex couples in Australia. In the 2013 election campaign, Labor Senator Doug Cameron accused me and other Greens of being idealistic when we called for marriage equality. In fact, in that term of government, Labor voted against marriage equality. What's changed? Do you support marriage equality, and what's your party's views on a plebiscite?
Yeah, anyone like to start the question? All of you, would you like to speak to marriage equality?
Yeah, sure.
How would you like to start?
The short answer for us at the League is yes, we certainly support marriage equality. It follows from compassion. I mean, really, how can one have a society in which it's right to love somebody else if you're a certain way inclined and not if you are a different way inclined? That just doesn't make any sense to me or to our people at all. So we're certainly in support of that. And as for the plebiscite, no, I think it actually should go just through Parliament, because otherwise it's a huge waste of money. And there is the danger, as Penny Wong was saying the other day, or perhaps today, that people start to bring out their various nastinesses. It's something which should be decided within Parliament. Thank you.
As Danielle pointed out, the Labor Party's come quite late to the support of marriage equality. The Greens have been supporting it for a long, long time. We were the party that had the first openly gay leader in the Australian Parliament, and it's something we're very proud of and something we stand by. The idea of a plebiscite is a nonsense, A, because it would cost a huge amount of money, B, because it will not be binding on the Parliament afterwards. They can simply decline to act on the result, and C, because it will give an opportunity for the kind of hate speech that we have heard from time to time from various anti-LGBTI groups. And I'm sure that given a publicly funded forum to pour a bit more of that vitriol out, they'll take that opportunity. And the distress that will cause people who are already, who have suffered this kind of thing for many, many years is unconscionable. The Parliament should have, all members of Parliament should have the courage of their convictions and vote according to those convictions. Thank you.
I can tell you my personal stance on this is I believe in marriage equality. If it came into the Senate and it needed to be voted upon, I would vote for marriage equality. If we had to vote on whether we were going to have a plebiscite or not, I would vote against the plebiscite. We've seen what happened in Ireland. We saw the terrible, terrible violence and vitriol that was going on over there. At what point do we think that's not going to happen here? Really, we're walking around with blinkers on or blindfolds or something. We don't think something like that's going to happen here. It will. That's what right-wing people do. Okay, thank you.
Speaking for the Christian Democratic Party, you know what my answer is going to be. No, we won't support that marriage. We don't believe that there is equality in marriage. We believe that they already have equality. They are already recognised in society. I'm actually quite for them having their own love union marriage if they want to, but marriage is between a man and a woman for the procreation of children. How are these children going to be protected? It is not going to be, it's not the end with same-sex marriage. It's going to go on. They're going to want to have children. So that means they're going to have IVU, etc. Now we're seeing an uprising from the children of the gay couples now speaking out, saying it's not fair. We needed to have a knowledge of what our fathers were or our mothers, of how screwed up they've had. So, yes, I think that now we're starting to see the ramifications of that. I do believe that the people of Australia have got a lot more common sense than to get into fights over this. It is a personal decision, and every person has a right to have their own decision and their own thought process on this. I think a plebiscite is the only way to go, that everybody should have their say, and then whatever the majority is accepted as how it will be. But no, I would not be supporting same-sex marriage.
Susan, you'll be leading off the final discussion. Do you want to speak to this one?
I was hoping to dodge this one. My personal view is do what you've got to do, be who you want to be. But the ALA's policy, and I've got to go with that, is to keep it the way it is. So that's the ALA's policy. That's the stance. Keep it traditional marriage, keep it the way the system is. My personal belief is I really don't mind what people do and so forth, but yeah. So let's just be honest. Thank you.
Susan, you now have the right of reply on this matter, and then you are the first speaker for your final.
And you'll time them separately, won't you?
Leaving my watch alone with respect.
On marriage equality, Labor will introduce a bill within 100 days of taking office to legislate for marriage equality. I'll be supporting that bill. No questions asked. It is, until John Howard came along, marriage and that commitment was not restricted by law to a man and a woman. That's when it changed, and we need to change it back. I'm not supportive of a plebiscite. I think it will, not only is it a waste of money, which I know Catherine's keen to get rid of waste, but it will unleash the sort of comments that this society, it will divide this society when really we need to be working at bringing our society together. It's already been divisive enough over the last term. So that's, you can start the clock now if you want on my... There is one little issue I want to address around the GFC. It's something that Labor doesn't talk about a lot, but I liken it a little bit when people say, oh, but Labor spent so much money, and, you know, we started with a surplus and then there was debt. We do need to keep in mind that we left with $10 billion deficit. It's now blown out to $37 billion deficit, and there is no GFC happening right now, yet it's blown out, tripled. However, saying that, you know, complaining about what Labor did is a bit like when you leave your clothes on the line. And they're dry on the line, and you go inside and you're doing something. Next thing you look at, you go, oh my God, the clothes are wet. Well, that's because it's been raining. And the GFC was a storm. There was a downpour of economic disaster that needed to be dealt with. And we needed to stimulate the economy. And we needed to do it in a way that little local shops got money, not just the big end of town. And that's a lot of what the spending was. Now, you could look back and think, you know what, we could have done that a little bit better. But by and large, around the world, people look to Australia now as having done best practice in dealing with the GFC, because we were the only OECD country that did not go into recession. And the problem with going into recession is people lose their jobs, and then you have to get them back in jobs. So that we are very fortunate to be where we are, and it was thanks to there having been a surplus. No one's underestimating that was a useful thing to have and gave us a bit more flexibility. What that really leads me to is talking a little bit about jobs, something I didn't mention. One of my concerns about this government has been the Green Army, a jobs program that supposedly is giving kids skills, young people skills. What I know is that, thanks to understanding it from someone in this room, that is only been functioning in this area thanks to thousands of volunteer hours. that have meant the program has hopefully delivered some skills to people who obviously genuinely wanted them. But it's based on volunteer hours. It's not a sustainable program, nor is the government's new proposal to pay people $4 an hour extra to be working. What Labor's doing is a proper youth jobs pathway. And this is going to target 3,000 long-term unemployed young people. We're doing it sensibly as a 6-month pilot program. There'll be one-on-one coaching for those people because, as Catherine said, people aren't always job ready when they hit the workforce or roll up for a job interview. There'll be training in core skills depending on the needs of the individual: punctuality, communication, planning, decision making. But more importantly, it will also, because it's a targeted pilot program, looking to see what does actually work so we can have evidence-based employment programs. All the evidence is that work for the dole does not work. And this will work to broker work opportunities with local employers. And that's the sort of thing I think this community needs. We have terrific local employers who want to make a difference and they want to employ locals. They just need support in doing it. So that's one of the really key programs. It's a tiny program, $21 million, but it has a real kernel of hope in it that we might be able to get a method that addresses one of the chronic issues we face, which is long-term unemployment, more specifically youth unemployment. The other initiative that we recently announced was also around small business and employment, and that's looking at giving small business a tax incentive so that if they employ someone who is young or, I hate to use the word old, so I'm going to say over 55, which doesn't feel very old to me, but over 55 where we know workers struggle to get work, or someone who's been a carer and is going back into the workforce, then small businesses will receive a $20,000 tax rebate for having employed that person, and there are obviously going to be conditions around that. But that's another way of using the great engine driver of this economy, small business, and giving them a very practical way to be able to grow and employ local people and help develop those people, which my experience as a small business person is small business really likes doing. It's one of the things that makes you proud to be a small business person, is you can see the people you've taken in, how you've mentored them, and that they've gone on to often bigger and better things than your little business. So there's some of the things that I think in the big messaging around our concern about the threat to Medicare, our commitment to want to fund education properly, to not have $100,000 degrees, to make sure we have a proper NBN. They're the choices we're making as a Labor Party. And I have never been more proud to be a candidate for Labor than with the policy suite that we have. So after this, I'm very happy if there are policies, areas I haven't mentioned, I'm very happy to stay and have a chat about any specific areas, because we have the best suite of policies that Labor has taken to an election, and they're not just things that we've done to win an election, they're things we've done to govern. And that is hopefully what we'll do from the 2nd of July. Thank
you. We've only got 2 minutes to speak.
Oh, I need a bit more.
Yeah, I'm sure I have more than 2 minutes.
I think if you go to our website, we've got 20 core policies. I could talk on each policy for freaking ever. I think one thing that the Australian Liberty Alliance will bring to the table is a much more focus on national security, on immigration, the 2 areas which I think the left side of the fence hasn't really discussed tonight. They haven't brought into the equation. They want a lot more open borders. We want a lot more closed borders. We want things to be monitored and checked, people coming in. I think that's an important issue. We'll definitely be getting off the backs of big business. It's no good. It sounds good to sort of tax big business, spend on all these other projects, but it's no good killing the golden goose, you know what I'm saying? So we will be getting behind big business a lot more. Immigration, national security, they're the things that we really want to focus on. Go to the website, there's 20 core policies. We will be looking at getting government smarter. There'll be 20 portfolios to go with that. I guess once you go to the website, once you look at our core policies, you'll see how we fall into sort of like, as I said, the way the Liberal Party used to be. We've got conservative views on that. Any more questions about those? Probably best to ring us, email us, etc. We can talk about them. But do your homework before you vote. Thank you.
I'd just like to briefly respond to something that Catherine said about young people coming out of school and not being job ready. Schools are not just job training centres. Education is about producing well-rounded, resilient, intellectually curious human beings. In a sense, to say that from an employer's point of view that these kids coming out of school should be directly ready to work in my business is saying we want to pass on our training costs to the public sector. I think we need a broader and more progressive view of education than simply job training factories. I just want to draw attention to, as you've picked up, there are quite a number of issues on which we in the Greens support the Labor Party and support Labor policies, and that's why we've basically recommended a preference arrangement on our ballot papers that will, in most cases, probably flow to the Labor Party, because we believe it's important to remove the current government. But I'd just like to point out that we're not a sideshow of the Labor Party, and we do have some very important differences. And if there's a hung parliament after July the 2nd, we may well have quite a bit of influence in having those items of ours on the agenda. The first one I'd like to talk about is that the Greens, and I won't say the only party because Hal would jump up and shout at me, but the Greens have, unlike the Labor Party and the Liberal Party, a humane and decent policy towards people who come to our shores seeking our assistance. Thank you. It is not a reasonable proposition to say we will keep hundreds of people in atrocious conditions in offshore detention centres to deter other people from getting on boats and coming here. The Greens would establish, in collaboration with the United Nations High Commission on Refugees and our Southeast Asian neighbours, processing centres in those countries of first arrival. We would then process asylum seekers as they arrive. If they prove, as usually over 90% of them do, to meet the criteria for being declared refugees, we will fly them here and we will assist them to resettle in our community and contribute to our society and economy as so many have. The second one I'd like to talk about is the brontosaurus in the room, and that is climate change. We agree that the Labor Party, for example, has a much better policy on emission reduction targets, for example, and other environmental issues than does the coalition government. However, there is a glaring omission in their policies. They decline to have a clear policy of phasing out coal mining and of retraining coal workers to take advantage of the coming boom in the renewable energy industry, which is what the Greens would do. As Sir David Attenborough said just a few weeks ago when he was visiting North Queensland, you can have the Great Barrier Reef or you can have the biggest coal mines in the world. You cannot have both. And that brings me rather neatly to the last point of difference, and it's a point of difference between the Greens and both Labor and the Liberal National Coalition. Both those other two parties take huge political donations from corporates. They take money from mining interests, fossil fuel companies, surprise, surprise, gambling interests, pharmaceutical companies, property developers, all of those sorts of corporate organisations. The Greens do not. If you go to the Australian Electoral Commission website, they've got a neat little page which sets out all the donations that have gone to all the political parties and where they came from. If you look at the Labor Party and the Liberal Party, you find a list of the four big banks, the big financial interests, and so on and so forth. If you go to the Greens, you find a tiny, tiny little amount, and the vast majority of the donors are actually members, parliamentary members of the Greens, who are donating part of their salary to the party. Now, that means we don't have the big budget for the big advertising campaigns and so on. But at least you know, when you vote a Greens member into Parliament, that he or she is representing you and not some corporate paymaster. And the last one I want to advise you of is that the Greens, out of that little threesome, is the only party that opposes on social, economic and environmental grounds any second airport being built in Western Sydney. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to thank you all for the opportunity to speak tonight. I really appreciated the chance to be here to share my message and let people know who and what I am about. Does it pass the grandchildren's test? That's what needs to happen when it comes to the Senate. That's what these parties need to be thinking about when they start to come up with ideas. Does it pass the grandchildren's test? You know, are our grandchildren's grandchildren only going to see pictures and be able to watch DVDs of the Great Barrier Reef? You know, what are we doing about, you know, for me that's a travesty. That's just terrible that's happening. And it is about the changes in the climate. How much of it's man-made? Scientists are telling us quite a bit of it. That we've contributed quite a bit to it. How much of it is cyclic? We're hearing other scientists saying, well, it's also part of the cycle. Well, let's get the information right. But I do believe we need to do something to reduce our emissions here. And I'm a big believer in solar. We should be doing a lot more with solar. When it comes to division within the Parliament, you know, it's fantastic how these guys will stand up and debate each other. And it's the one that yells the loudest and debates the hardest that wins the argument. But at what point did we get thought about? What was the cost of the debate? They forgot who they're talking about, which is the grandchildren's grandchildren. Come on, wake up. You know, it's all well and good to be really good at arguing, but what does that successfully do for the community? Except that you can argue and then bully your ideology forward as being the one that everybody needs to follow. I have a real problem with those sort of divisive parliament. Everybody else spoken to has a real problem with divisive parliaments and what's going on there. It filters down, it impacts, it affects the rest of society, it affects communities. When we engage in divisive conversation, when we display divisiveness, such as what happens, what we see happening in the House of Reps, or in both levels of Parliament. You know, just because somebody wears a different colour tie doesn't mean their idea is a bad idea. And just because you get into Parliament, into government, doesn't mean you then have to rip out everything the other mob did and spend billions of our dollars wasted to put your own version of something in that's not so different. You know, if it's a good idea, it's a good idea, adjust it. And that's what we should be doing. And that's the sort of thing we need to bring in there from a Senate perspective. And the other thing is, and I'll be quick, because I know we're constrained by time, but you know, when it comes down to this concept of lies, damn lies, let's I keep talking about let's pull back the curtains. And it's like, when I always talk about that, it's like what they give us is a room full of windows, and they put curtains right across all the windows. And when they wanted to bring something out, and this isn't just one type of party out there, it's a lot of politicians. When they want us to see something, they'll pull apart the curtains to one window and they'll let a little bit of light in. What I believe we should be doing in the Senate is going along and just getting and opening up all the other curtains. Let's open up all the other curtains, let's get the light in for everything else. Let's see what's really going on. So that's what I'm there for. When you look on your Senate paper, which is going to be pretty much the size of this table apparently, I'll be on the far right-hand end in the very last column and almost down the bottom, about a third from the bottom. Start there. And then you can vote for whatever party you like for the rest of the 11 numbers. Okay, thank you.
just wrapping up. I think the CDP will bring a balance and a conservative approach back into our government and accountability to the government. Be a watchdog, I think. And I think the people are looking for this to take the power out of the two major parties and give a more balanced government through there. Excuse me. I guess some of the issues that we haven't actually touched on tonight was freedom of religion, negative gearing. I do want to have a put into negative gearing, because I traded through the last lot of negative gearing, and I can assure you the people that get hurt the most are the tenants, not the real estate agents. We actually do very nicely out of it, because people have to sell their homes. They want to sell their homes, they want to get out of it. So we have a massive influx of sales, we're on a rich. People that suffer from it is when all the rentals dry up and they're voicing for a rental, somewhere to live. It is pathetic to see young families crying out the door because they can't afford the rent. I've seen people living in cars with kids because they cannot afford a house. Now, it's all very well to say the rich get richer, but they are doing the community a service also by providing those houses that the government cannot provide. So I think that is something that we have got to remember. Also, there is a new trend in the marketplace at the moment where young people are actually using negative gearing. And this is so important that everybody has missed it at the moment. I can't understand it. They are actually purchasing homes that they can't afford, or units they can't afford. They're living with mum and dad, and they're renting their properties. Probably negative gearing to start off with, until they get them into a situation where the tenant's paying them off and then they're paying it off as well. And then they get a good amount of security behind them, then they move into their own house. That's how they're getting into the market. They're being smart, they're using what's available to them. So I don't think that you should throw out negative gearing. We saw it before and it was forced back because of the way people were having to live. The refugees, I'm sorry, but when we have countries in the Gulf War, in the Gulf section of the east over there, that have not taken one refugee since all this started, they are the richest countries in the world, and they are Muslim. I do not support an influx more of Muslim refugees. Yes, I think that we should be looking after all our refugees that come into the country and in a humane way. But I do believe that if you look at what's happening on the global scale, Islam only 100 years ago ran all over Europe. They were pushed back to the east, and it's only been 100 years. People have forgotten. They do it by assimilating into the country. Sharia law is now wanting to be introduced. Halal, you pay just about on every item that you buy in the shopping centre. That could be going off our deficit. Have you thought about that? People don't mind paying it because they don't know, but what are you paying it for on Weet-Bix? It's already halal. I think we've got to stop and be smart and start thinking about what's actually happening here. So I would just like to leave you with, the CDP will bring a balance and a more conservative look back in government. Thank you.
Thank you. I think there's a bit of wide range of choices tonight, isn't there? As I listened to Catherine, there's almost nothing that she was saying then that I could possibly agree with. So, despite the fact that I'm sure the basis of her as well is compassion of some sort. What I say to you is, why would you vote for the Animal Justice Party? Well, it's because our party makes you focus upon compassion, upon those who can't speak for themselves, upon the voiceless in our community, upon our children, and as Peter said, upon our grandchildren's grandchildren. It's when you require yourself to do that but you start to think about the whole community and the whole society and the whole world. If you don't do that, if you don't put compassion into politics, the effect is that you get the kind of thing that sadly Catherine's talking about. It's all to do with self-interest. What's going to be best for me? Forget about everybody else. Forget about our grandchildren's grandchildren. What's going to help me in this moment? That's not politics as we need to have it now. Our world is limited. We need to think about our limited resources. We need to think in terms of the future for ourselves and our children, our grandchildren's grandchildren. We need to learn how to focus upon those who can't speak for themselves. The best way to do that is to start with the animals who live with us and who are voiceless. So please give a voice to the voiceless. Vote for us first, then these guys here, the Greens and the Labor Party.
We've come to that point where we need to close the evening out and let somebody get away. I think we've had what we came here to get. We've had open, candid, free-wheeling discussion. We've not necessarily gone to all the topics that you would have wanted to speak about tonight, and I think that's inevitably going to be the situation. Life is like a box of chocolates sometimes, and we didn't necessarily get the flavours that you wanted tonight, but I think we certainly got a fair go. In closing, I would like to thank the three elements that made up this evening. The community groups, and I've worked with some of these groups, but I've worked with generally community groups, and I know how hard they work and how passionate they are about making sure that their community has the best opportunity that possibly can in our children. And the hard work that you people, I've got the message, there's a payback for this. And I'm extremely grateful for the effort and the time and the focus that the community groups have put into this evening to make sure that we have a fair and unbiased discussion. So consider it is that they do have an exit poll, and they would like to know how you felt tonight went. So could you please take the time, the pens and paper just over here in the baskets there. And also, I don't want anyone here with out-of-pocket expenses for having gone to the trouble of bringing this night together for us. So there is a cost for this hall, and the groups would be very grateful if you would make a gold coin donation as you leave the door. And there's the young lady with the yellow bag indicating where she would like you to be. The second group, of course, are the candidates, and we tend to, most of us have often shied or looked at the idea of putting ourselves up for candidacy at some point in time, and we have run to the nearest exit. It's an onerous place. I don't envy them. I certainly admire them for having the courage and the tenacity to come and put themselves forward to serve us, which is ultimately what it's all about. So, to all of the candidates, thank you for your time tonight. In some regards, we would be happy if we can get all the candidates here, although we would have liked a more robust discussion. And finally, you, the people here tonight, you care about your vote, and we therefore care what you think and how you've taken this evening. We hope you've enjoyed it. We thank you for your close attention. We thank you for the respect that you've given everybody around you and for acknowledging that other people have different points of view to your own. So I wish you all a very pleasant evening, and I wish you a safe trip home.
I think we should thank David for the way he conducted.
So just to let everybody know, the video tonight will go up this way.